The trauma bay lights hummed overhead as Ensign Callie Reyes clocked in for what should have been an ordinary Tuesday shift at Naval Medical Center. 24 years old, 6 months out of nursing school, and still learning where the supply closets were located, Callie had spent her first months at the hospital feeling like an imposter among the seasoned staff. Nobody knew that before nursing school. She had spent 3 years as a Navy corpsman attached to a special operations unit, treating gunshot wounds in the back of moving vehicles and running triage under fire in places that never made the news. She had buried that part of herself along with her rank insignia, choosing instead to start over as the quiet, unassuming rookie nobody looked at twice. That anonymity ended within the hour. A massive pileup on the coastal highway sent a wave of casualties through the emergency doors. 12 patients in various states of critical injury, arriving faster than the department could process them. The charge nurse froze for half a second too long, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of blood and screaming and monitors shrieking in discordant alarm. Doctors were stretched thin, pulled in 4 directions at once, and the department teetered on the edge of chaos. It was in that half-second of hesitation that Callie stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise with a calm, clipped authority nobody had heard from her before. Triage by color now. Reds to Bay 1 through 4. Yellows hold for reassessment. Greens to the hallway carts. She didn't wait for permission. She moved through the bay like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she had. Her hands found a pressure point on a bleeding femoral artery before the attending physician even reached the gurney. She called out vitals in short, precise bursts, directing 2 confused residents to intubate a patient in Bay 3 while she simultaneously packed a chest wound in Bay 1. The rest of the staff, sensing something had shifted, simply started following her lead without question. What none of them knew was that 3 floors up, in a private consultation suite, a decorated Navy SEAL Admiral was meeting with hospital leadership regarding a classified partnership between the base and the medical center. Admiral Marcus Wexler had seen combat across 4 continents and had buried more men than he cared to count. He was there to evaluate the hospital's readiness for handling mass casualty events involving his own operators. When the alert came through about the highway pileup, he asked, out of professional curiosity, if he could observe the emergency response. The hospital administrator, eager to impress, walked him down personally, expecting to showcase the department's protocols in action. What Wexler saw instead stopped him cold in the doorway. A young nurse, barely out of her 20s, was running a mass casualty response with the fluid precision of a combat medic who had done this 100 times before. He watched her execute a needle decompression on a collapsed lung with textbook technique, watched her call out a medevac-style handoff to the trauma surgeon that used terminology he hadn't heard outside of a battlefield. His security detail, 3 men who had served with him for over a decade, exchanged glances behind him. They recognized the cadence in her voice, the specific rhythm of someone trained not in a hospital but in the field, under fire, where hesitation meant death. Wexler stepped further into the bay, unable to look away as Callie moved to the 11th patient, a teenage boy with a crushed airway. Without missing a beat, she performed an emergency cricothyrotomy with a steadiness that made even the trauma surgeon pause and stare. The boy's oxygen levels stabilized within seconds. She moved to patient 12, an elderly man in cardiac arrest, and began compressions with the practiced rhythm of someone counting in her sleep. The defibrillator charged, she called clear, and the man's heart kicked back into rhythm on the second shock. By the time the last patient was stabilized and wheeled toward surgery, exactly 58 minutes had passed since the first ambulance rolled through the doors. 12 patients, 12 survivors, not a single loss. The department fell into a stunned hush as the adrenaline began to ebb, nurses and doctors alike staring at the young woman who had just orchestrated the impossible. Callie straightened, blood on her scrubs, hands trembling now that the crisis had passed, suddenly aware of the eyes on her. That was when Admiral Wexler stepped fully into the bay, his presence immediately changing the air in the room. Hospital staff straightened instinctively at the sight of the uniform, the 4 stars, the weight of command radiating off him. He walked directly toward Callie, ignoring the administrator's flustered attempt to introduce him properly. He stopped in front of her, studying her face with an intensity that made her stomach drop, because some old instinct told her exactly who this man was and exactly what he might recognize. "Corpsman Reyes," he said quietly, using a title she hadn't heard spoken aloud in over a year. "3rd Battalion, Task Force Cerberus. Am I right?" The color drained from her face. The secret she had buried, the identity she had left behind, stood exposed in front of an admiral and an entire emergency department full of witnesses. Every nurse and doctor in that bay turned to stare at her, the same question forming behind their eyes. Who exactly was this rookie nurse, and what had she been hiding? If you love stories about hidden heroes revealing their true strength when it matters most, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, because Chapter 2 is about to reveal exactly who Callie Reyes really was, and why an admiral flew across the country the moment he heard her name. Chapter 2. The silence in the trauma bay stretched long enough to become unbearable. Callie's mouth opened, then closed, unable to find words steady enough to answer. Around her, the department staff stood frozen, torn between the aftermath of the mass casualty event and the unfolding scene between their quiet rookie nurse and one of the most decorated admirals in the United States Navy. Admiral Wexler didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His steady, measured tone carried more weight than any shout could have. "I read the after-action report on the Kandahar extraction 18 months ago," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "A corpsman kept 6 wounded operators alive for 11 hours in a collapsed compound with no resupply, no evac, and small arms fire the entire time. Command wanted to put that corpsman up for the Navy Cross, but the corpsman requested to leave the program instead, and the file went quiet. I always wondered what happened to her." He paused, letting the words settle over the room. "I never expected to find her running triage in a civilian air 3 years later, saving 12 lives in under an hour like it was nothing." Callie finally found her voice, though. Came out smaller than she intended. "I didn't want the medal, sir. I wanted to help people without all of that following me. I just wanted to be a nurse." Something shifted in the Admiral's expression, the hard edges softening into something closer to respect. "You didn't just become a nurse, Reyes. You became one of the finest trauma responders I've seen operate, military or civilian. What you did in this room today, keeping 12 casualties alive under that kind of pressure, that's not something you learn in nursing school. That's something forged. And people forged like that don't get to hide forever, whether they want the spotlight or not." He turned toward the hospital administrator, who had gone pale watching a routine facility tour turn into a career-altering event. "This woman just proved your department can handle a mass casualty event better than half the field hospitals I've inspected overseas. I'd like her voice in the room when we finalize this partnership." The trauma surgeon who had worked alongside Callie throughout the chaos stepped forward, still processing what he'd witnessed. "She saved that boy's airway with a crick I've only seen done in training videos. She called the defib sequence on the cardiac patient before I even reached him. I thought she was good. I didn't know she was." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely, unable to find the right word for what he'd just seen. "Combat trained," Wexler finished for him. "The best kind of trained, because it's not about following protocol. It's about knowing when protocol has to bend to keep someone breathing." He turned back to Callie, and for the first time since entering the bay, something like a small smile crossed his weathered face. "You hid your record, Reyes, but you couldn't hide your instincts. 12 lives in under an hour is not luck. That's a decade of skill compressed into 58 minutes, and every person in this department just watched it happen." Word spread through the hospital within the hour, nurses and doctors from other floors finding excuses to walk past the emergency department just to catch a glimpse of the young woman who had quietly saved 12 lives while an admiral watched in stunned silence. The story reached the hospital board by that evening, and by the next morning, the administration had already begun drafting a commendation. But for Callie, standing outside the hospital after her shift finally ended, none of the attention mattered as much as the quiet moment when Wexler had shaken her hand and told her that real strength was never about being seen. It was about showing up when everything fell apart and refusing to let anyone slip away. 3 weeks later, Callie was formally offered a position as lead trauma response coordinator, training emergency staff across the region in combat-tested mass casualty protocols. blending her military background with her civilian nursing career for the first time since she'd left the service. Admiral Wexler personally attended her induction ceremony, standing quietly in the back of the room, watching the same rookie nurse who had once tried to disappear into anonymity now step forward as a leader that an entire department looked up to. She never asked for the recognition. She never wanted the spotlight. But sometimes the truth refuses to stay hidden, especially when 12 lives hang in the balance and only one person in the room knows exactly what to do. Callie Reyes never set out to be extraordinary. She simply refused to let people die on her watch, whether she was wearing a uniform in a war zone or scrubs in a quiet coastal hospital. And in the span of 58 unforgettable minutes, she reminded an admiral, a hospital full of doctors, and herself that true heroes rarely announce who they are. They simply act, and let their actions speak loud enough for everyone else to finally understand.